There is a very specific type of historical fiction that I feel basically powerless against. I'm not talking about the romanticized kind with the pretty dresses and the Regency setting. I'm talking about the ones that take something real, a real injustice, a real event, some kind of grief or trauma, and puts you right in the middle of it without flinching. And when it's done really well, I feel like there is almost nothing better in a book. So today I'm giving you 10 historical fiction recommendations that absolutely wrecked me. Books I was still thinking about weeks, if not months after I finished them. I think you're gonna love these. So, starting off with a short one. This one is an International Booker Prize winner. At Night, All Blood is Black by David Diop. It'll pretty much ruin your entire week. It's set during the First World War, but it follows a Senegalese soldier who's fighting for France, which is a perspective we don't often hear from. Our narrator watches his best friend die in no man's land and is essentially powerless to help him. And from that point, the book really unravels into something dark and obsessive and hypnotic. Diop's writing has this rhythmic, incantatory quality. It was originally written in French, and the translation by Anna Maschovakis is just beautiful. This book felt like nothing I've ever really read before. I finished it, I turned off my e-reader, and I just kind of sat there for a minute, and I didn't know what to do with myself. It's short enough that you will read it in one sitting, but it will stay with you for much longer than that. Full disclosure, I didn't love this book when I read it, but I'm still thinking about it months after I read it, so that has to tell you something about it. And then we have a book by an author that I feel like I mention very often on this channel. The book is The Mercies, and it's written by Karan Millwood Hargrave. This is a book that is set in 1617 in a small fishing village in Norway. And no spoilers, it starts out with a storm that essentially kills every man that lives in the village in just a single night. What follows is this really immersive story about the women that are left behind. How they survive, how they rebuild, how they take over these roles that they were never actually supposed to occupy. And then a witch hunter arrives from the mainland, because of course, and things get very dark very quickly. What I really loved most about this book was the atmosphere. It's freezing and it's bleak and it's so utterly remote in a way that just really got under my skin. And Hargrave writes female friendship and solidarity in a way that feels really genuine and tender. It's also based on real events, which are of course the Vardo witch trials, which makes it much more devastating once you look it up. If you like your historical fiction deeply atmospheric and emotionally heavy, this is the one for you. A debut novel set in Victorian London, we have The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill. I listened to this one on audio, which is why my paperback is absolutely perfect. So we are set in 1850 in Victorian London. We follow Iris, and she's a young woman who would really love to be a painter, but of course in this era, women don't get to be artists. Iris ends up meeting this pre-Raphaelite painter who essentially wants her as his muse. And then they have this little deal where she starts to train as a painter herself. And then of course along comes another man who is completely, dangerously, obsessively fixated on her. This book does something really clever. It is beautiful and lush and has this almost gilded surface. The art world of Victorian London is really vividly realised. But underneath all of that, there's this really creeping dread throughout this book that just builds and builds and is so uncomfortable. It's dark in a way that I just didn't see coming, and I mean that as the highest compliment. It's gothic, it's atmospheric, and it's so brilliantly plotted. And then, as I mentioned, this was Elizabeth McNeill's debut, which is really something in and of itself. If you want your historical fiction with a dark edge, this one is essential. And you can't really have a historical fiction list without this author. And I could have chosen pretty much any book by this author, but I'm choosing what is probably the most popular, not my favourite, but still really, really good. Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. If you haven't read this yet, I am genuinely a little bit envious of you because you get to experience it for the first time. We're once again in Victorian England and we follow Sue, who is a young pickpocket, and she gets recruited for this really elaborate con. She'll pretend to be a maid to this wealthy young woman so that her associate can seduce her and essentially steal her inheritance. And that's all I'm going to tell you about the plot. What I will tell you is that this book had some of the most jaw-dropping plot points that I never saw coming. I remember exactly where I was sitting at one point in this book, and I literally just had to put it down because I didn't know how to deal with the revelation. My brain absolutely needed a bit of a moment to catch up. Sarah Waters, though, she is a masterclass in plotting and atmosphere and character within historical fiction. This book is about 500 pages, but don't let that deter you. It absolutely flies. It's one of the best historical fiction books I think that's ever been written, and I will die on that hill. And saying that, my favourite Sarah Waters is The Night Watch, so just throwing that in there as well in case you're curious. And then rounding out the first half, The Colony by Audrey McGee, because of course this is an Irish one. I feel like I bang on about this book all the time, but I just cannot help myself. It's set in the 1970s on a small island off of the west coast of Ireland, and it follows an English painter who comes to paint the landscape and a French linguist who comes to study the Irish language. And then of course it's about the small Irish speaking community that has to put up with them both. It sounds quiet, and in many ways it really is. The prose is quite spare. It's mostly dialogue, but it's just this really searing examination of colonialism and identity and what it means to have your culture studied and documented by outsiders. The troubles are happening on the mainland and they bleed into the island in ways that feel deeply and uncomfortably real. Audrey McGee's writing is unlike anything else in Irish fiction. Precise and restrained and absolutely devastating. Shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and in my opinion criminally underrated. Okay, we're halfway through, and I just want to say very quickly, if you're enjoying this video and you want to see more from your friendly neighbourhood Irish booktuber, don't forget to subscribe, and do drop a comment and tell me if you've read any of these books so far and what you thought of them. Back to the books, we have 5 more. The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. So this one was one of my absolute favourite reads of the past year. It just tickled something in my brain and I really loved it. We're set in the mountains outside New York in 1975, and we're in a summer camp for wealthy families. When a girl goes missing from the camp, it emerges that also there was a disappearance of another child from the camp about 13 years earlier, and the mystery that unravels from there is genuinely so gripping. But this is so much more than a thriller. It's a really literary book. It's about class and it's about privilege and the stories that families cultivate in order to protect themselves. And the forest setting is so vividly rendered that it almost becomes another character within the book. It's a big one. I think it's around 500 pages, but it is a book that I absolutely flew through. If you like atmospheric literary mysteries with real emotional weight, this one is a must. Off to the Netherlands with a book that was longlisted for the Booker Prize in 2024, we have The Safekeep by Y.L. van der Wouden. So we're set in the Netherlands in 1972, post-war, but the war is present within everything, I would say. We follow Isabel, and she is this fastidiously controlled, solitary woman, and her orderly life is disrupted when her brother's girlfriend comes to stay. What begins as this taut and slightly uncomfortable character study gradually reveals itself to be about something so much bigger and so much darker, which I won't tell you about. You'll have to read the book to find out what I'm talking about. This is such a precise and unsettling book. The prose is restrained almost to the point of coldness, which really perfectly mirrors Isabel as a character. And the way that the author unwinds this historical horror so quietly and so slowly, it hits so incredibly hard when it finally lands. This is also a sapphic novel, and it's written so beautifully. I cannot believe that this is a debut. I think that this is probably one of my favourite books on this list overall. Completely unlike anything else I think I've ever read. And then off to the 1950s in Jim Crow era Florida, we have The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. We follow 12-year-old Robbie, who is a young black boy who is sent to a brutal reform school after he defends his sister from a white man. The school is really harrowing in its historical accuracy. It's based on a real institution, the Dozier School for Boys, where real atrocities took place. Another element then within the book is that Robbie can see ghosts. So there is this supernatural layer running through this book, which I know is probably a little bit unexpected, but it actually works really well and makes the whole story feel that much more devastating because the horror is rooted in things that actually happened. The supernatural elements aren't gimmicky, they really add to the effect of the story. Ju handles a really harrowing and painful chapter of American history with such unflinching honesty and real love for her characters. It won the Bram Stoker Award for Novel of the Year, and again I feel like this is another book that is criminally underrated. It's long, another one I think it's close to maybe about 600 pages, but every page is genuinely worth it. Please read this book. And staying in America but moving into the future just a little bit into the 1970s. All the Colours of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. Okay, bear with me. This sits right on the edge of historical fiction and literary thriller. So depending on how purist you are about genre, your mileage may vary with this one. But it is so good that I absolutely refuse to leave it off of this list. So it spans several decades in a small town in Missouri, starting from the 1970s onwards. And we follow a young girl who survives something really horrendous, and then the boy that's really desperate to protect her. It slowly builds into this epic, sprawling story about memory and survival, and the long shadow that violence casts over a community and the people within it. Chris Whitaker writes with this extraordinary emotional generosity, even with complicated characters, that just completely broke my heart. If you've been sleeping on this book, please wake up. And then the outlier on this list is a book that is a literary horror novel with a lot of magical realism thrown in as well. Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This book is massive. It is a big, sprawling and genuinely dark book. It's set in Argentina, spanning the 1960s through the 1990s, and it weaves together Argentina's brutal political history, the dictatorship, the disappeared, with an occult secret society that has been chasing power and immortality for generations. It's a lot. It's like 700 pages, so yeah, it's a hefty one, and it is also sometimes genuinely quite frightening and eerie and creepy, but it is also one of the most ambitious and singular works of fiction that I have read in years. Enriquez embeds the very real horror of what did actually happen in Argentina within this dark fantasy framework, and the effect is absolutely extraordinary. If you want something that's really going to challenge you and also stay with you for a very long time, this is it. It's an absolute beast of a book in every sense of the word. Save it for when you have some time off and just surrender yourself to it. And those are 10 historical fiction books that I think about constantly, from a 150 page devastating novella to a 700 page occult epic. I genuinely think that there's something on this list for everyone. I'm not somebody that loves the idea of sitting down to read a history textbook, but give me historical fiction, give me context, and I will Google the life out of that topic. I've learned so much from these books. Let me know in the comments if you're adding any of these to your TBR, or of course if you've read any of them, what did you think of them? I always love hearing from you down below. If you've enjoyed this one, then maybe you should click on this one next. And friends, I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.